This is part two, and we're looking at the Chancellor's letter that was dated in March of 2015. This is based off an extensive investigation, which included a 7-month State Attorney General investigation into attempting to have them investigate a couple of formal grievances that have never been investigated. So here's some of the people right here that apparently were involved in this. Of course, they had the threat assessment and care team member. The threat assessment. Well, there was a threat, I guess. I mean, the thing is, if you're doing wrong, bad things, and you're going to get caught, you're going to feel threatened. And this is exactly the way they're acting. So here's where they talk about all the evidence they have. And so the preponderance of the evidence is very low level. I mean, and this is ridiculous. When you look at their findings, you can see the whole thing's been whitewashed, that there was no investment in actually investigating this, and that the different bad actors were never held accountable. Provost Andrew Bodman, who never investigated the formal grievance, the academic formal grievance filed the same day, is never even mentioned. And he just didn't believe it. So basically, this is the findings. So we have with Portillo that he didn't do anything wrong. I mean, the fact that he was a subordinate, an interim HR subordinate investigating the president and student affairs, the number 2 guy, Brian Haynes, and Sandra Vasquez, that was fine. Of course, we know that Brian Haynes intervenes in the investigation to where Portillo apparently tells him a conversation based on a confidential call that I had with him the day before, which resulted in my immediate suspension. So Dr. Haynes suspends me while he's under investigation for failing to formal the grievance, for failure to investigate the formal grievances. It's just ridiculous. So this is the other allegation that, of course, the suspension, they never state why they suspended me, because whatever their position was, and I believe it was on the lines that I had made a threatening comment, it was ascertained through the investigator, the police, different professors, that this never happened, that this was just, unfortunately, another incident where we have Dr. Haynes and Sandra Vasquez as very bad actors, and they're actually creating evidence that doesn't exist. And this is what Vasquez gets nailed at the University of Santa Barbara for doing. So this is a bunch of baloney. This lady was a major player in this fraud. Now, she had just arrived from Dartmouth, just arrived, fresh off the plane, and they throw her into this complete hoax hearing where they're not producing any witnesses, where Vasquez has the police call her, where nothing about the police call or Vasquez is going to be discussed, let alone the formal grievances are completely shut down. She continues to threaten me that we're not here to discuss that somehow the suspension, which took place during the EO 1097 based on the failure of the formal grievance, had no nexus at all, which is ridiculous. And so this is part of what they're going to do too, is they're going to separate the issues, and they're going to pretend that each issue is organic in itself and that it has no connection to anything else going on. When in fact, if you look at what Haynes got away with, you can see that this is how they're segmenting everything. But in fact, they've got it all wrong. So they're basically substantiating. Again, this level of evidence is so low, and the evidence is so damning against Dr. Haynes. I mean, what he did, and what he will do at the University of California, Riverside, is simply immoral and wrong. I mean, I just can't. I mean, unless you want this guy there, unless you want a gatekeeper, a guy who's going to violate student rights, and who's going to interfere with investigations, and then he's going to, illicitly suspend you for 9 months out of your program, and there's no accountability for that. And so they're actually claiming that, that Haynes did retaliate against me, but in the lesser crime. They took the old brother off the hook of his collusion with Portillo, and Portillo's responsibility for that, which was Portillo was never held responsible for violating that tenet of the investigation, which would have corrupted the entire investigation. Well, we already know the investigation was completely corrupted. So what they're saying, now this is a guy, if you listen to Chancellor Wilcox over at UCR, Brian's this nurturing guy, and he's going to lead this multifaceted pack of students in the 21st century. No, he's not. I mean, the thing is, Dr. Haynes is really in love with Dr. Haynes. Okay, he's really about himself and about his career. It's very clear he's not going to represent the rights of the students, particularly when they go against whatever the university may be doing, which could be a sexual harassment claim, and there's many situations that students can find themselves in where they're going to depend on an ethical person to remedy it. So Haynes, I mean, the thing is, so what they're saying is that Haynes' action, failing to conduct an investigation, which happened in February, he had from the 21st of February to about the end of February, beginning of March, to do the investigation. Well, this EO in 97 isn't filed until like March or April. Okay, so months have passed. And of course, they're not going to do any timeline because this would ruin their narrative. I mean, they can't support this. They're just saying this. And this is part of the PSYOP. This is part of what they're trying to do to destroy you. They really are. They're not there to build you up, to improve your critical thinking, unless it's dissecting this unbelievable behavior of these state employees. So the problem with this whole thing about, that he did all this because of his anger, it just doesn't make any sense because, I mean, he failed to conduct the investigation on the formal grievances, okay? So there was no retaliation at that point. I was just encouraging the guy through multiple emails and such to buck up, that he had a timeline, that there were things he had to do. And then he calls me right on the day that the investigation should be complete. And he's really arrogant. And there's some anger there too. And he's basically not going to do the investigation. I mean, he didn't call me to ask me any questions or to conduct the investigation. I'm not really sure why he called, only because he had to. But he was rude, and he hung up because I started asking questions about why he didn't do it, about can he do it, will he do it. And again, those two formal grievances with Dr. Bodman and Dr. Haynes, filed on February 21st, 2015, have never been investigated. There's simply no proof of that. So the problem is with Haynes is that he was involved with the illegal suspension. He worked with Sandra Vasquez, and those two staged the evidence what they used to suspend me while they were under investigation. And all this is being, and Portillo was just, brought in, and unfortunately he's a puppet. A lot of these people are just puppets. Same thing with Satterlund. They're just going to do what they're told. And then you have the people that are running it, more like Brian Haynes, who would be responsible. He's the number 2 on campus, and Morales, and the dean of the CEL, Carmenova. So, and here's where they just do a broad brush that the allegations, of course, let's talk about Thomas Morales. I mean, the thing is that he refused to meet with us. We were very polite, called his office a lot. His employees were great, never took my calls, refused to meet with us, never responded to emails. But yet he was never brought in as a witness that I didn't have direct contact with him. Sure, because he was hiding in his office, hiding behind his secretary. I mean, this is the kind of president we have. And this guy he's already damaged goods. I mean, he was on a second vote of no confidence at CUNY right before CUS swept him away. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense unless you want a guy who's compromised, who's a puppet. And that's what this guy is. So it's hard to say who's pulling whose string, but he's definitely not on top. And it's really unfortunate for us. I mean, if you're going to run this fraud, that's fine, run it. But don't fuck with us. So back to Bodman. Bodman's an arrogant pommy, and he did call up late. He didn't meet the 10-day deadline to conduct the investigation, and he called it just to say that he wasn't going to investigate because he didn't believe it. And of course, Sandra Vasquez, she's deeply involved. She's a major player, a huge manipulator, a narcissist also. And she's dangerous because she has no empathy, and she's a psychopath. And she was caught lying at UC Santa Barbara. I mean, she staged the whole suspension. She's the one that contacts Portillo along with Haynes. You know, and they concoct this whole plan to suspend me as a ruse to avoid investigating. The whole thing was just smoke and mirrors. Take our eye off the bullet, and we're going to slam this guy for filing these complaints, and we're going to stage these hoax suspension and expulsion hearings. We're going to edit the transcripts. And by the way, the audio transcripts of the hearing, they don't exist. I guarantee they don't exist. Because just to listen to those and compare them to the written transcript that they produce, it totally avoids Vasquez's bizarre behavior and the lies. I mean, again, Vasquez is locked down in her office. They can't work. She has a police presence. I've never been on campus, right? I mean, this is how, and I'm outside the office I'm conducting, as this hearing's going on, I'm on my cell phone, according to Dr. Sandra Vasquez, outside her office. This is scary shit, you know, when you have these officials, and she was the ethics compliance officer, can you imagine? And then she was like dean of students. I mean, she actually got a promotion. They're awarding these people for this kind of behavior. But she was unbelievable. I mean, the theatrics, her fear, them being in danger, and never identifying what the danger was. In fact, she actually said that she had worked for the FBI and she had worked for the state police, and, you know, she was a discreditable person that had all this experience, and she had never met anybody as dangerous as Jake Wallace. This is her sworn testimony, which never shows up in the transcripts because it's just ludicrous. It's just like she's off her meds. I mean, it's just totally bizarre. And again, here we see another example where they're never talking about the facts. They're going to start attacking you and undermining you, and I'm outside our office. And by the way, I was in the San Joaquin Valley at that time. And during the hearing, they acknowledge it. They actually at one point say, look, we know you're not on campus. And I'm like, no shit. Well, then let's talk about this call. No, we're not talking about this call that the police just made. And by the way, the call didn't make it onto the transcripts because it's just insanity. And the hearing officer, again, just another puppet, willing to go along with this fraud, this complete fraud. But they can't hold them accountable. They just can't do it because there's too many players involved. I mean, when you got the whole team in on it, and no doubt there's people like Portillo, probably not Satterlin because she looks pretty hardened, but if you look at Portillo, and I know for a fact that he was threatened. He actually told me. I mean, he had to intervene. I mean, he had to toss them whatever they wanted or pretend that they wanted so they could suspend me and shut this thing down. And he did participate because they threatened him. It still doesn't make it right. I mean, and then he gets promoted. Okay. So again, the least important fact that Dr. Haynes is found for these two offenses, but there's nothing connected to the offenses. All the other fraud that we've mentioned so far is never connected. And of course, Haynes is involved with the entire thing, as is President Morales, as is Sandra Vasquez and Bodman. I mean, they're a hell of a team. You don't want to go up against them. So now these are the remedies, and by the way, they've never happened. I never was able, so let's look at A. They're claiming they did this. Who knows? I've never seen my academic record. 2, they readmitted me on the campus, and by the way, the master's degree has no academic advisors. And so there were specific classes that I wanted, and I was assigned to work with the guy in charge of finances. He's like the vice president of finance, okay? He's adding my classes. I mean, this is how insane it had gotten, all right? Nice guy, right? Ahmed or whatever his name was, nice guy. But again, you really think the VP of finance wants to be coordinating a student's, academic classes in the College of Extended Learning? I mean, this is how they roll at Cal State San Bernardino. So they actually forced me into these classes. One class was simply the M.A. TESOL certificate. the 120-hour class that a lot of teachers would be aware of. I already had the certificate. I mean, why